Because, everyone, breaking news, the GOP-led House of Representatives, this is literally hot off the press, everyone, at the time of recording within the past 5 minutes. The GOP House of Representatives has voted 215 to 208, so it was close, to limit Trump's powers over the war in Iran. If there wasn't ever a rebuke of the war of choice that this president has undertaken in the past 3 months, it is this. And I'm delighted to be rejoined by Alia Brahimi, who is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and who we've had on a couple of times now by popular demand. She is back because she always does a fantastic job of cutting through the noise and us having a good conversation. But Alia, I mean, as I say, there's limited information to go on this. I'll try and find some more. But what's your immediate reaction to this? How big a deal is?
I think this is just showing like what a compound problem this has become for Trump, right? And how the kind of own goals and the drama and the disempowerment for this seem to be never ending. And indeed that people within his own party are willing to put their names to criticism of what's happening in Iran, which is extraordinary given his hold on the movement, on the party and on the movement. And I think, you know, I'm sure that you'll reveal more details as you get them, Peter, but what also happened overnight was this exchange in strikes as well. So just as the war seems to be hotting up again, or potentially, he's been sort of neutered in a sense, or they've made the effort to. But, you know, with those exchanges of fire that have been happening in the last 24 hours, there are a couple of things. The first is that the Iranians, and I think this is relevant to the vote as well, the Iranians are showing no sign necessarily of military weakness, right? Or of fatigue, or even of reticence in their strikes. They haven't been put into any box militarily, it seems. You know, they retain a significant military capability, significant firepower. And what they did yesterday or overnight was they hit back hard. And the second thing that you have is CENTCOM issuing statements saying, you know, the Iranians fired on US military bases, but we intercepted everything. Nothing was hit. Anything you hear to the contrary is fake news. I think they said something, no US personnel or assets were harmed in Kuwait. But then you pick up your phone and you see footage of Kuwait's international airport on fire and severely damaged. So what must the United States as allies be thinking? And I think this also will have fed into the vote by lawmakers in the US. You know, how are our allies perceiving us? This is where the US-led security architecture, you know, is leaving them, unfortunately. And as I've been saying all along, you know, the Gulf states have been taken as hostages, strategic hostages. They have no agency in this. And now they're watching while Iran flexes its muscles all over again, seemingly as strong as ever. So it's a trauma for them and an unending nightmare. And I think that one option based on the tit for tat would be for the US to try and escalate, Trump to try and escalate his way out of this. But then we have this bombshell kind of vote, which would hinder that option, and which of course transfers more power over the strait back to Iran.
Yeah, I mean, look, we were streaming with Larry Johnson yesterday when the war or the strikes with Kuwait were happening.
Right.
So I was having a debate with Larry about the propensity for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. We can go down there a little bit. I mean, a lot of people who at the time really didn't like me challenging Larry, but I've agreed with him on some things, but not everything. And I certainly didn't agree with him on that. But basically, Larry had a source, supposedly. The problem being that is that it was unconfirmed, which, well, I can say that the Russians have invaded Britain. The sources are unconfirmed, but it's happening, promise you. Sort of, it doesn't mean much. But anyway, bottom line is that we were talking about that as the strikes were happening in Kuwait, and I think Bahrain was recipient of some strikes or spillover, and even Saudi Arabia. So, yeah, it just seems to be that the Iranians were responding in tit for tat because of the American strike against that tanker. So it's just a snowball. It's just a continuous. The analogy I use is a merry-go-round. We're just on a merry-go-round of flare-ups. We're on a merry-go-round of the peace talks. because every so often you'll hear an update from people being like, I mean, Trump said it even a couple of hours before this vote. He said, you know, he expects something over the weekend. That was what I was going to title this conversation with you. And then we get this breaking news as we go live. Point being, as I say, though, is that we've got these periodical flare-ups where both sides sort of take pot shots at each other, but neither side is wanting to fully follow through in terms of return to full escalation. And now Trump's been hit with this seemingly sledgehammer of a vote. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. How did you look at the strikes yesterday? Was it pretty severe, or was it largely sort of what we've come to expect at this point?
No, I think the Iranians hit back very hard and deliberately so. One. Two, you know, you refer to it as a merry-go-round, but, you know, there is an element of the Hotel California about it, right? and, which is how I think of it. And that sort of element of desperation too, you know, where he's seemingly is really struggling to leave. And I think when you juxtapose a couple of things that have happened just within the space of the last 24 hours or 24-hour period on Monday, Tuesday. So one was that statement from Trump, the President Trump released on the White House social media platforms saying, did you see that? It's a picture of him and it says, just sit back and relax. It'll all work out well in the end. Which obviously didn't comport with reality with the ceasefire falling apart that day. The Iranians threatening, they actually said on Monday, we're going to walk away from these talks. And prices are obviously rising in the US. The average American consumer can't just sit back and relax. But I actually liked a comment that was below on the X post from a member of the public who said, guys, the hardest thing about a 2-week war is the 4th month. And I think that's, you know, that's the issue here, is that this is totally unscripted and these waters are uncharted, and you know, maybe he doesn't know what he's doing. But I think anyway, that kind of laissez-faire sentiment of just sit back and relax. He also said to a reporter on Monday that talks with Iran were getting very boring, and that he couldn't care less if they broke down. But then we have this account of the highly emotional phone call he had with Netanyahu on Monday, where Trump says, you're fucking crazy. You'd be in prison if it wasn't for me. I'm saving your ass. Everybody hates you. And Netanyahu said today, actually, oh, that was just a tactical disagreement. But no, I think that's quite big. So I think the space between that kind of feigned fatalism of whatever, and then the lashing out in desperation, I think that's looking like a war that's already been lost. And that if there is to be any kind of modicum of victory, it would have to be snatched from the jaws of defeat. And I think that's probably what most members of Congress are sort of picking up.
Yeah, it's. I'm just reading here some of the latest information about this. So yeah, I'll read a bit more. So the War Powers resolution passed by a vote of 215 to 208, with 4 Republicans joining the Democrats in support. So it's still pretty partisan. The resolution had originally been set for a vote 2 weeks ago, but Republican leaders sent House members home early for May recess when it appeared the largely Democratic-backed measure had enough Republican voters. However, the extended break didn't shift GOP support to kill the measure. So Mike Johnson, Republican, or House Speaker Mike Johnson, said, quote, remember, Iran declared war on us 47 years ago. They chant death to America. Now, the vote is mostly symbolic. Democrats, despite multiple attempts, have been unable to pass a War Powers resolution. It is in the House. But the Senate Democrats are moving closer. I think that this is, even if this is symbolic, right, Alia? I don't know if you agree with this, but like, even if it's symbolic, it's still it still underpins the overarching direction of the political climate against Trump, right? It still demonstrates that things are getting really untenable for him right now, let alone in what, 5 months from now or whatever, 6 months, six months to nearly to the week, right? I think it's in November, early November is midterms, right? So 5 months. No, 5 months. Okay, so 5 months, just under 6 months to go. But yeah, so like, I don't know, what is the fact that it's symbolic weaken it to you?
No. It doesn't. It's about the optics, right? And he's got massive optical problems. So that just adds to the optical nightmare, I think, with this campaign. And I think that there are a couple of other bad optical elements. One is the nuclear file. And I think the other is just the money. And for me, that's a big thing to watch. In the talks that happened in Doha, I think it was like a week ago today, maybe 10 days ago, Ghalibaf and Araghchi, the chief negotiator and foreign minister, so they were joined by Iran's central bank governor, Abdel Nasser Hamati, because access to funds, so in these negotiations, they're including the central bank governor, because access to funds and assets that were frozen under Western sanctions is absolutely key for the Iranians. They want to deal with the nuclear stuff later. The priority for them now is money. You want the Strait open? Show me the money. This is a huge, as I say, optical presentational problem for the Trump administration. And we talked about, I think we talked about it here last time, that if Iran gets sanctions relief, which is what they're after, for reopening the Strait, they're basically monetizing the Strait, whichever way you cut it. They might not be charging tolls, as I said before, but they'll be getting a cash windfall. And that to them, that's about winning, but it's also about regime security and being able to consolidate power at home, given the way that inflation is going in Iran and all of the hardship, the prices for bread, meat, cooking oil, sugar, fruit. So they have that imperative, like very to the fore in their minds. Trump and Rubio have said repeatedly, they will not pay Iran. We're not paying Iran to open the Strait. But ultimately, I can't quite imagine a scenario where money doesn't change hands at the time of the deal or in a phase shortly thereafter, because Iran is determined to access the $25 billion of its central bank funds that are frozen in foreign bank accounts. And there's another 100 billion frozen behind that from secondary sanctions. So the question for Trump's team, along with this vote, is, how the hell are we going to sell any of this at home? Given that it would look like Iran was being rewarded for closing the Strait, given that President Trump had so fiercely criticized the Obama nuclear deal 10 years ago for just this thing, which we can talk about, and given how much harm the IRGC potentially could go on to do with this money against US interests. So, these are all very, very bad kind of messages that are just lining up and creating this kind of presentational quandary, because ultimately he'd like a way out of it, if not a meaningful one, then an optical one. But the doors keep slamming in his face, and I see the congressional symbolic vote in that light. There's another bad look.
No, I think that's a really good point. I just, from the people I know in Washington and the years that I spent there, which is quite a few, enough to say that I lived in the city and I knew it professionally, is that even if symbolic votes like this pass, they still carry a little bit of legitimacy, because to your point, legitimacy matters very much in Washington. Washington is very superficial like that. And if I actually, fun fact for everyone watching, we actually had Senator Mark Kelly on the program earlier today, so look out for that episode. But he was quick to argue and criticize the Trump administration. Not that I let him, I didn't hold him accountable for some of the shortcomings of the Democrats, but the point is that the climate, the environment of Washington is such a cesspit. In some ways, the city's lovely to live in, but the environment itself, political nature, is not so much. So, I think that this vote is going to have more repercussions and people might like to admit, especially from the MAGA group. But
look at the fund, look at the fund that was, against the weaponization of the government, that was supposed to reward his political supporters. That got nixed, didn't it? Because of just like a kind of like quiet backlash behind the scenes. So I think momentum can gather, outside the formal process as well.
Yeah, so I'm just reading here a little bit more. So Trump said today that negotiations are, quote, going very well, and that Iran has agreed it will not have a nuclear weapon. And this was the point that I thought was interesting. I haven't really had time to read into this fully. Was that Khamenei himself, Mojtaba, the son, obviously, the new supreme leader, has been more involved apparently, and that he'd probably meet him at some point. I love that. Trump just seems to want to hang out with all it's either the King of England or every sort of strongman and despot in the world that there seems to be. This guy really has I'd love to see who he invites to his dinner parties. Or what's that game you play where, like, if you could invite one person dead or alive. I'd love to see who Trump had to pick, right?
Well, you're right, they have something in common. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because
I don't know. I mean, no, just looking at Iran's foreign ministry said that the two sides remain both very far and very close. I just think that the Iranians are running out of the way to say the same thing, which is that, we are not going to move of our demands, but, we're willing to talk, sort of thing, right? They're essentially rehashing the same political statements and diplomatic statements every 2 days.
Yeah, and they do like to speak in riddles as well. But on the Khamenei point, I think that strength does turn President Trump's head, like with Putin. Like, I think everyone's learned that, and it's almost like he admires, grudgingly or otherwise, authoritarians, right? So that we are very far away from day one, where he was saying unconditional surrender and nothing else, where, a few hours ago he said he'd like to sit down with Khamenei. But I think it's also that, ultimately everything we've discussed is a boulder rolling down the hill and tending towards one thing, which is that President Trump probably needs the ceasefire more than anyone else. He needs it more than the Iranis, more than the Israelis, and especially Netanyahu, and more than Hezbollah, which we can talk about as well. Iran doesn't necessarily, because even a resumption of military force would underscore strategic defeat for the US. I think that's how they're seeing it. And it would give the IRGC an opportunity to demonstrate its remaining capability and show how robust it is. And also the fact that it's willing to risk the ceasefire and to basically continue chewing glass. And then in southern Lebanon right now, Hezbollah are on the offensive with drones, which the IDF cannot defend against. We can talk about that. And then in the Red Sea, the Houthi, I think that they'd be more than happy to flex their muscles and show their mettle. So Iran and its allies have more to give right now, as you do, actually. It's always the way it breaks when you're defending your homeland, as we see in Ukraine. So, they're in that position where they're like, we're going to keep going until you're out and you leave us alone. While President Trump, he needs this wrapped up yesterday.
Well, what I liked, another comment of his, Trump really has a way with words, or doesn't, but relative to other people, it's so bad that it's consistently impressive. Simply is, given the strike on Kuwait International Airport, it killed at least one person, 60 people were wounded, mind you. It's not a small thing.
No.
Trump acknowledged the exchange of fire by saying, and I love this quote, "A ceasefire there is much different than a ceasefire in other parts of the world." I mean, I guess you could argue that he has a point, that the Middle East is perpetually unstable, but that's kind of through the fault of colonialism, or Britain especially, France, Russia, and America in modern times. So what is he essentially saying? That sort of, well, is that his way? Well, I think it is, but I'll ask it to you, Alia. Is that just Trump basically being like, yeah, well, they violated, but we really want this peace deal so much that we're willing to sort of pull allow the wool to be put over our eyes, or whatever the expression is, like, ignore it.
Yeah, no, I think that this is actually emphasizing a very recent development. It's nothing integral to the region, but it's the Israeli rubble strategy and the you cease and I fire strategy from Israel. So we know that the ceasefire in Gaza has killed like 1,000 kids, but that's tolerable. We tolerate it because of some embedded, issues that we have with seeing and humanizing the people that are being killed. The ceasefire in Lebanon has been violated every single day. The IDF have bombed from the air, if not, other activities. And now we see in Iran. So I think he's saying, well, look at the benchmark. He's saying in his within the confines of his own dealings with the region, this is normal. Well, Israel has normalized this, right? And I think that he's not wrong. That, we had a problem historically where ceasefires always froze conflicts and they dealt with none of the underlying issues. So there would be flare-ups. And as you say, there's this perpetual instability. But the notion that you have a ceasefire in name and you continue to bombard, you continue to kill children, you continue your campaign almost unfettered, I think that's such a dangerous development. And I think other parts of the world will draw on it. Going forward, it's setting a precedent, and it's certainly what Trump was invoking, as though it were a law of nature and something that was entirely normal. But I think that it's very likely actually that Israel is trying to sabotage the Iran ceasefire, both with that idea that the Gulf states, the remaining Gulf states, sign up to the Abraham Accords. I think that came from Israel, allegedly. And then with this escalation that we're seeing right now in Lebanon, because as I said before, Israel doesn't want a ceasefire. It wants to resume the bombing. It wants the bombing of Iran to resume as well. And that's for electoral campaigning reasons. And I think what the Iranis have done is sort of call Netanyahu's bluff in a way by linking the two arenas. So Trump was then forced to rein in Netanyahu. But anyway, as I say, what was happening in Lebanon anyway was not a ceasefire. And I think Israel will continue in the south of the country, and it's bombed Lebanon every day, as I say, since the ceasefire was announced a few weeks ago. And we should all be very alarmed that this has all been normalized. And Israel can maintain that it's undertaking a ceasefire when so many people are being killed, so many homes are being collapsed, and so many families are being displaced. Let's hope this is not the new normal.
No, I wanted to talk a little bit about Israel, obviously, because it's been such a prominent aspect. The Israeli strikes on Hezbollah have completely clouded the prospect of the talks getting, like, the talks would be difficult enough as it is, but clearly Israel's war against Hezbollah in Lebanon are really drawing this whole thing out longer. And we've seen on and off in the past few days Trump's sentiments about Netanyahu, his real antipathy towards the prime minister's sort of disruption. But and what actually I'll be specific. So what I'm interested in your reaction to was when he wrote that post on the weekend, maybe Monday, and he basically said there will be no troops, no more troops anymore. Like, that sounded like some geniuses thought that was American troops coming into Lebanon. No, guys, he's talking about Israeli troops. Absolutely. But that's still a big deal because the head of one state is essentially dictating the operations of another sovereign state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I mean about the Iranians calling the bluff, because they linked the two arenas and they said, we're going to walk out of these talks unless Lebanon is on the table, because look at all that killing that's taking place. And Trump said, rein it in, Bibi. And I mean, ultimately that shows, which is the tail and which is the dog. But I think that if we look at it in the round, that directive or that advice from Trump, I think, might ultimately be doing the IDF a favor. Maybe not Netanyahu, because he wants this perpetual war for the next election, which is not due to take place, for a few weeks, but for the IDF itself, because I think any conversation now on Lebanon has to account for the game-changing battlefield conditions, right? The script has been flipped in Lebanon by Hezbollah just recently. So, in the last few weeks, where the Israelis, they've adopted the predictable playbook of invading the south of Lebanon and bombing Beirut, but Hezbollah have adapted considerably. And the focus on that adaptation has been on using explosive kind of kamikaze fiber optic drones. So Hezbollah was previously heavily dependent on vulnerable groups of fighters firing anti-tank guided missiles and other rockets from out in the open. But now they have these drones, FPV first-person view drones, that cost less than $500, right? They are physically connected by a teeny tiny wire to their operators. So it doesn't have a radio signal, so they can't be jammed. So this then puts Israel in a very difficult position, because they rely on all those electronic warfare mechanisms. Also, the drones themselves are made of fiber, and apparently they do not show up on radars. And so this is proving to be a tactical nightmare for the Israeli military, which is struggling to defend against it. And right now they're just sort of using nets over their troops, which is not a long-term solution. And I actually found today on a Hezbollah Telegram channel a video of them manufacturing these drones inside Lebanon. So we can assume that the supply will be rather robust. And what this means is a couple of things. I think one is that, as I said, that one of Israel's main advantages, the electronic warfare stuff, is sort of defunct with this. But also that Israel might be able to occupy territory in southern Lebanon, but it will be much harder to hold it, because these cables can go back for many miles. I don't know if any of your listeners, your audience, has seen the animated film Waltz with Bashir about the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the 1980s. Oh, it's so beautiful. But essentially, we've seen this movie before, literally. And the Israelis are back occupying southern Lebanon. They're losing troops. They're contending with this new dangerous tactics. There are going to be major psychological effects on morale. And all of this was chosen by Netanyahu. No one forced him into this. And yet he needs it for his political career. So, like Trump and the Obama nuclear deal, Israel's getting sucked back into this predictable whirlpool that they should have learned lessons from and could have been avoided. And, I said before that Iran has discovered its own power through all of this, but so has Hezbollah, or it is in the process of discovering it again now, rediscovering it. And so in that context, I think that a ceasefire imposed by Trump might not be a disaster for the IDF after all. The IDF, and Israelis, these poor guys that are having to fight, but not for Netanyahu. He definitely wants to continue. Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I muted myself just because you carry such I can't even think of the right word. It's just important to listen to you, Alia, that I feel like I should just mute myself.
I think you didn't want me to hear you typing, is why you muted.
I'm typing it because I need to buy like an iPad or something so that it's not on the computer. But like, I don't have like 3 TVs. I'm not a trader, right? I don't have like 60 different screens and 4 keyboards and
it's not a situation room.
I'm not a twat. Excuse me. No, I don't know. Trading's not for me. It's important to invest, everybody. This is not financial advice. No, we had an interesting conversation with someone earlier about gold and the geoeconomics of things, which I thought was worth doing. So if you haven't watched that, guys, go and watch that after this stream and subscribe if you haven't yet. But anyway, there's my CTA, or call to action. But no, aside from that, I think what is interesting is that we had a blunt conversation with a few people, and I interview a lot of different perspectives, but what I don't have as much is the Israeli perspective, which I kind of want to engage people who are more from Israel or the pro-Israeli side. But bottom line with all of this is, do you think that the Israeli government specifically has a genuine intention of expanding Israeli territory, or they are effectively doing it? Do you think the idea of a greater Israel is actually what's happening right now, the long-term goal?
Well, it's gained traction considerably amongst a certain group who are now at the center of power. So yes, unfortunately, I think the complexion of Israel has changed entirely and rapidly in recent years, and then accelerated in recent weeks. And these people, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, these people that have nooses on their birthday cakes, they're in the center of power. So it's hard to differentiate between the objectives of the government and those that its representatives are stating. So I think it's actually a moral emergency for Israel itself. While everything is changing around it, and while it itself is remaking the landscape around it, internally, there's a huge change, as I say, in its complexion, in its dynamics, in its future, in its values. And, there are so many, I think we have to always remember there are so many Israelis, particularly on Gaza, but also in Lebanon, that are on the front line of putting the argument for why this has been a moral disaster. There are so many brave activists, but just ordinary people. There is that movement within Israel, but I think that it's being, the tide against it is so strong. And it always has been, but now these people are accessing, the center of power. And I think they will change the country, and they will change the place of that country in the region. I think that they will make Israel less safe ultimately. And I think this is a major inflection point, because they do refer to these lands, including in southern Lebanon, as part of their greater vision, which was not a mainstream, even recently was not a mainstream ambition. And here they are.
Well, yeah, it's just one of the things I read earlier that Israeli and Lebanese diplomats have held another day of talks in DC to try and find a way to deal with to secure some kind of deal, but it feels hard to reconcile the fact or grapple with the fact that whilst Israeli diplomats are trying to pursue peace, the Israeli military, which is at the behest of the political establishment, is killing 9 people in southern Lebanon and continually occupying a sovereign state's borders. Yes, you can argue that Lebanon's been a failing state for a long time, but part of that is because of the foreign interference of the Israelis against Hezbollah in the first place, as well as Hezbollah itself. So, no, go on. I mean, I don't. There's a question in there somewhere. I'm just sort of airing my, how it comes across to me as someone
of course,
at a limited level.
No, I think that what they're trying to hash out in these talks, and the agenda has been set by the Israelis, is to force the Lebanese state to disarm Hezbollah. So I'm not sure if that's exactly like, a peace framework, but essentially the president and the Lebanese government are kind of hostage to this. The Americans are forcing them along to these meetings where they're supposed to ultimately hash out a plan to disarm Hezbollah, which has only been strengthened and which only has more incentives to retain its arms because of the Israeli invasion. So this is an impossible situation that the Lebanese president is in, that the Lebanese government is in, and certainly the Lebanese armed forces, who would be the ones to do the disarming, are being weakened daily by Israeli troops marauding through their territory. So the whole thing is one big contradiction. And they know it, the Israelis know it, the Americans know it, the Lebanese, well, maybe the Americans don't quite understand it, the Lebanese know it. So there's a performative element to all of this. And I think part of that performance is so that the Israelis can continue their campaign inside Lebanon and try and kind of, put the Lebanese president in a chokehold to make it look like they might be partners. Whereas they're occupying and invading forces inside Lebanon right now. That's a terrible look for the Lebanese president. It undermines him greatly. The Lebanese people understand that. But what you need is a strong Lebanese government, a strong armed forces, and for Lebanon to have a semblance of peace and not have foreign troops on its territory in order to begin that task of transitioning Hezbollah, the emphasis of Hezbollah from an armed movement back towards, its social welfare and political features, which are very, very pronounced. It's so much more than an armed movement, and that's why it's so difficult to uproot. But they know that we know that they know. There's something about it that just feels like a game and a performance. And I just shake my head when I see the Lebanese that are having to go along with this. Given what how many on any given day, how many Lebanese civilians, a lot of them defenseless and a lot of them children, are being killed by Israel. So yeah, I don't know that many administrations would have taken this approach. But as I say, the structural issue of weakening both the state and the armed forces, the Lebanese state and the Lebanese armed forces, which just got back on its feet after those terrible years of civil war, to weaken those structures by having Israeli troops in Lebanon, but then demand that those structures go in and disarm Hezbollah. The whole thing, as I say, is just a bit of a logical mess.
It takes a certain level of insanity or sadism, I think, to make Trump seem like the reasonable and restrained one, in the fact that Netanyahu calls for the bombing of Beirut. It's not like it's this is the distinction. I was covering Ukraine earlier today as well, and they've been targeting naval sites, they've been targeting assets as much as they can, or so they claim, that are of a military nature. In the case of the Israelis or the Israeli government and his war cabinet, they just bomb the city. They just bomb Beirut.
Yeah.
There's no, and what does aggravate me a lot is that there's an emphasis on Israel being at the forefront of military doctrine, of warfare, and defining the roof knocking idea, the concept of launching a non-explosive projectile onto a roof of a settlement or a target, warning the inhabitants about, hey, we're going to bomb this building, we're going to take it out, so we're giving you a few minutes to get out. That's never, it's rarely, it has an occasion. Well, again, I'm sort of I feel very conflicted talking about this, because in some ways it's supposedly been true, but then in others it's not, just isn't, when they've used it. And it's like, but why did you, like, I don't know. It's just, there's so much inconsistency about their application and implementation of international law, despite often lauding the fact that they are at the forefront of developing, law of war.
Yeah. And the most moral army, they repeat that. Netanyahu said that just a couple of weeks ago, again, in the face of what they've done. But I think that, all of this testimony, I think that the historical weight of evidence is going to emerge from Israeli soldiers. I think it's probably starting to trickle out. But what they have done and what kind of sort of organizational culture that they had in their units that allowed them to do these things, I think there's going to be a big reckoning there. But I think just on, the Christian, what's so interesting is that it is these atrocities, and they are atrocities being committed day in, day out, right? They have actually, I don't know if you watched Tucker Carlson's interventions and his interviews, but he's a kind of symbol of that sort of Christian-driven movement within the US that is scandalized, based on the precepts of their faith, about the killing of innocents by the IDF. And I think that what's so interesting is that this kind of MAGA, it's the attacks on children and stuff that I think are maybe sort of eating into, or sort of injecting nuance into the MAGA bases debate about Israel, but it's also attacks on Christians too, right? So as this kind of like intense Jewish nationalism, as the movement that we were discussing, as it becomes more and more powerful, more and more normalized, you are going to see increasingly, and we are seeing increasingly, attacks against not just dirty Arabs, I can say that I'm an Arab, Muslims, but Arab Christians, and then just like Christian nuns. And I think that's scandalizing and energizing some of that MAGA adjacent Christian base within the US. So I think that will move the needle even more on Israel in terms of the domestic US debate. And certainly the war crimes for both, Christian motivated onlookers and otherwise. Those war crimes, those atrocities, particularly against children, are the core of that. And I think they're uniting disparate camps within the US against the IDF's campaigns in the region.
So explain to me one thing, though. I'm seeing some comments here which kind of has made me think about it. Why hasn't the Lebanese government been more capable or willing to do something to curtail Hezbollah's power? Because Hezbollah was in a pretty bad situation after the incapacitation, shall we say, of Nasrallah and other senior officers or whatever. So, like, why haven't the Lebanese government tried to do more to, like, just get a hold of Hezbollah and control the country with the legitimate military forces?
Oh my God, they would if they could, but they can't. So one, Lebanon was suffered through many, many years of terrible civil war, to the extent that, even your young audience will know that Beirut is synonymous with the ravages of that kind of intercommunal violence, into which piled a whole bunch of other foreign states. So that was a disaster for more than a decade. After that, and that was perpetrated by militias, sect-based militias, religious militias, community militias. So there was no national army to speak of in the early 1990s. Between then and now, there's been this painstaking, painful at times, effort to build up a national armed forces, right, that are Lebanese, that serve Lebanon, that transcend, sect and social group. That has just been finding its stride in recent years. And Joseph Aoun, who's now the president, General Aoun, was the head of the Lebanese Armed Forces, the LAF, before he became president. And he was really kind of the capstone of that sense that the Lebanese now have a truly national army. But those gains were very fragile. To be at that point, to finally approach the summit and to be starting to talk about these issues as a society, how can we get to a place where non-state actors disarm, to begin that conversation and then have the Israelis do what they do, what hope is there? So they've been massively set back because the Israelis have just justified Hezbollah's need to protect the communities in the south by retaining their arms. And Hezbollah is also an entrenched social and welfare actor within Lebanon. So there's a huge, which represents a huge community within Lebanon. So there's a whole negotiation that has to take place. And there's the understanding that that problem will only be solved politically. There's no military solution to that problem, right? They have to be willing to give up, and they have to be given alternatives, and their community has to feel safe, first and foremost. How are their community feeling safe now, with what's happening? So yeah, Lebanon, they were trying, and they made some efforts, but none of it was good enough or fast enough for Israel. And I think that's one of the major casualties of this war, is to kind of weaken the left, weaken the presidency, and just re-establish the need for Hezbollah to exist and to protect its constituency. So it's certainly set back that effort.
Okay, interesting. So what do you think happens now then? We've met a few times in the past couple of weeks, and there's been peaks and troughs or moments of flare-ups, but ultimately we still seem to be in the same situation, right? We still seem to be in moments of flare-ups, as I say, but then another claim of peace talks. Is it mainly about Israel-Lebanon at this point determining when the broader Iranian US-Israeli situation is finalized, or you think it's all too chaotic to even predict?
Well, Israel-Lebanon is a very important dimension, but I think also dynamics within the Strait itself and with Iran itself are febrile and could go in many directions. The US, Trump might, and maybe out of spite with this symbolic vote, might feel that he has to escalate to get out of this, to not look weak. Robert Pape writes a lot on this. He might feel he has to hit back, and then the Iranians do, and then the ceasefire could unravel. But that is ultimately, and these things have a logic of their own once they start. But Trump is trying to contain them for now, because he knows that his interests don't lie with expanding and perpetuating this war that Netanyahu had convinced him to get into. But I think that, as I say, he desperately needs a ceasefire. The Iranians feel that desperation, and I think that they will weaponize that. But if we get to a point where there is a framework deal, that leaves the main issues completely untouched, which were, as we went into this, about the nuclear program, right? So, I think that the bombing has probably only reinforced the idea for Iran that it needs a nuclear deterrent. And then also we had the Obama deal, which Trump was so critical of, that I mentioned before, where basically the Iranians agreed to dismantle their nuclear program and to open up to inspectors to get relief from nuclear sanctions. And the US, I think the whole point was that they wanted to prevent Israel. The American administration at the time, part of that in 2018 was to prevent, 2015, to prevent Israel from feeling that it needed to take preemptive action against Iran, and then plunging the whole region into chaos. So that's why we had that nuclear deal, the Obama nuclear deal. One of the reasons was they didn't want this to take on a logic of its own and the Israelis to try something. And then guess what? Explicitly at the time, though it was the idea that this would plunge the region into chaos, but also that somebody would close the Strait of Hormuz to oil shipping, right? So the Obama nuclear deal wasn't a fluke or a kind of afterthought. It was a very important strategic initiative that was geared not just towards containing Iran's nuclear program, but to kind of safeguarding stability in the region. And it took 18 months of painstaking, highly technical negotiations, right? And this is without a big war before it. So this is going to be a long process, Peter, is my point. And I don't know that there's going to be a nuclear deal before the midterms. And Trump had criticized Obama so relentlessly, but it was working well. And I think now it would be a relief for everyone to go back there. But, that's a long march home. And yeah, we're seeing the very conditions that the Obama deal was designed to thwart.
Yeah, it's just funny how we've come full circle. Not you and me, but like just the sort of international community and observers, commentators that talk about this, but also the deal itself, right? Criticisms of the JCPOA were a dime a dozen. There are a lot of them in the first few months, a couple of years afterwards. But as time has gone on, always hindsight is, you know, what's that expression? Something hindsight, whatever it is. Everything's better with hindsight, whatever it is.
Yeah, being 2020.
yeah, that one. It's just like, oh, JCP, oh, it's a great deal. Oh, it's really good, actually. Why did we ever leave that? And then Trump leaves in 2018. So, like,
yeah. He left in 2018, setting off this dynamic. You know, Iran began enriching. Iran had held to that, you know, to its undertakings under that deal, and it began enriching again in 2019, and especially after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that IRGC leader in Iraq in 2020. And so, yeah, here we are, and you know. I think I said before that there are all these memes about the US replacing the Taliban with the Taliban, replacing Khamenei with Khamenei. And my one is that now they're going to replace the Obama deal with the Obama deal. But again, as I say, that's not happening anytime soon. And that would be a good outcome. That would be a good news story if it happened, and it's far from certain. And also Iran has changed, you know. Everyone has changed by this. It's the whole neighborhood has changed, the whole region has changed, and there's no going back. So I think calculations will change, identity will change, conceptions of the future will change, and conceptions of safety will change. And I think that it's probably incentivized having a nuclear deterrent, not just for Iran, but for other states. And, you know, obviously that's a disaster.
So I guess to leave it for tonight, Alia, as always, really appreciate you. We had a few changes to the time, everyone, but if you enjoyed it, then do, of course, as I say, like the video and subscribe. But Alia, where can people find you? I guess two final questions sort of weaved in. What should people keep on the lookout for? But as a way to do that, where can they follow your work? You see, that was a smooth.
It was smooth. You know, I mentioned before, I'm like a little bit reticent with social media, but I am there. But particularly LinkedIn. But I've just started. I started this a few weeks ago and then left it. But I've started it again, which is a Substack. I haven't launched it yet, but I think I'll post something tomorrow. I think I'll post something tomorrow on Lebanon. But it's called Highly Irregular, and it's basically about irregular warfare. So it's my Substack that has no followers yet, apart from my mom, that I'm going to launch tomorrow, I think. So if anyone wants to follow me there and have a chat, because I think you can chat on Substack, right? You're going to have to hold my hand, Peter, because I don't know how to use these platforms. You're muted.
I swear it does it automatically. No, I was going to say we should definitely do it on Substack occasionally. I'm trying to do more overlapping between the two platforms because a lot of people have said they want to see my writing as well. So yeah, let's definitely think about that. But no, I think that's a good point to leave it for tonight. We've got Russia's International Economic Forum. Everyone, Putin's had his hometown literally struck by Ukrainian drones. We've got Trump being messed around by Benjamin Netanyahu, Lebanon on the receiving end. Basically, the world is a mess. And every day I wake up thinking, oh, could I have a little bit more of a line or a little bit more of a degree of sanity just to focus on some menial tasks? Nope, I then got to be like, let's make a live stream for this. Let's do a video all over the place. But anyway, Alia, I really appreciate you jumping on. Everyone for watching. Thank you so much. Say, do check out Alia's work on LinkedIn. We'll see you very soon.